Let's talk about remote learning. Here's a big story I've been following, and I'm interested in the new data on remote learning for all of the families that had to deal with the lockdown, the quarantine, and trying to teach their kids for the very first time math and science and reading and writing, and trying to deal with all of this while also having to provide for your families. Maybe you're out of work, maybe you're struggling to work from home and you need peace and quiet, and you can't have 3 kids climbing all over you while you're trying to actually provide for your family. It's been a disaster. Well, according to the new data out this morning, remote learning has been a total fail, according to the data. Now, I do want to couch that a little bit because I know some families have had a great experience with it. Our family, while struggling with it, we've actually ended up having a great experience with it. And we've seen our kids excel in certain subjects through remote learning. We'll get to that in a moment. But overall, this has been a disaster. I mean, kids trying to work from home, trying not to have their brothers and sisters climbing all over them while they're trying to do this work, and trying to actually learn a new way for the very first time, trying to learn on a laptop with their teachers, trying to learn how to use, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all of this for the very first time. According to the data, it's been a total disaster. The problems began piling up almost immediately. Listen to this. There were students with no computers at all, of course, no internet access at all. Teachers had no experience with remote learning, so not only did the kids not have the chops to do this, teachers weren't ready for this. God bless them. And many parents weren't even available to help at all. They're like, hey, you got to go do what you got to do. I can't do that. And in many places, lots of students simply didn't show up online at all. They were supposed to be there at 8:30 in the morning, and they just didn't show up. They weren't there. Administrators also had no good way of, you know how when a kid's not in class, you mark them tardy, right? I got a few tardies in my day. How about you guys? Let me know in the comments. And then guess what happened? Soon, many school districts just weren't requiring students at all to do any work at all. They threw up their hands. They're like, we don't know what to do. And there was an increased risk that millions of students right now will have huge gaps in their learning. And that's starting to show in some of this data. That what will happen is that when they come back to school in 2021 or the fall of the 2020 school year next year, that many of them are going to have huge gaps in their learning. Huge. Listen to this. Because summer basically kind of started early. I'll get to that in a second. Primary research in all of this suggests right now that when kids go back to school in the fall of this year, they will be at 70% of the learning gains in reading relative to a typical school year. They'll be at 70%. That's like a C. And in math, they'll be at 50%. That's a D, right? Or an F. They'll be at about 70%, 50% in reading and math when they get back in the fall because of what this coronavirus lockdown has done. So summer basically started early. Take a look at this data. This is mind-blowing. I didn't think about this, but when you start looking at these charts, it's crazy. So, and it's not as bad for 8th, 7th, and 6th graders. Okay, this is the chart I'm going to show you first. 8th, 7th, and 6th graders. So typical at the end of the school year, see that little, with that arrow at the top here? Let's start with the 8th grade arrow. At the end of the school year in middle of June, people have, you start to have summer memory loss is what they call it, okay? But what ended up happening is if you go back a little bit further to March, do you see where that red line starts? That's where the summer memory loss began already. And in 7th grade, you see that line? It gets even deeper. And the gap is even bigger for 6th graders, okay? Then look at, this is the really troubling one, 5th graders. Look at that huge gap. Memory, it plummets. They're almost reverting in 5th grade to a level below where they started in September. They're actually almost set back an entire year. 4th grade and 3rd grade. So really the worst year is 5th grade. If you know any 5th graders, boy, this is going to be a difficult year for them going into 6th grade. Isn't that amazing? Don't you think so, Grover? He does not like that. I don't blame you, man. I don't blame you. Yeah, that is really troubling stuff. So 5th grade, when you look at that data, their summer memory loss will almost set them back an entire year. Because of all of the critical things that you're learning in 5th grade, for this to be the year that you had to go through this, oh, my heart goes out to you. My son is in 4th grade. My daughter is in 2nd grade. It's not been easy. It's not been easy. This was my daughter and my wife this morning as she was trying to do some math-related thing. This is the back and forth fighting that we had in our house this morning.
Write out your data set first.
1, 3, 8, 7, 5.
Remember.
Okay.
Remember, you're going to have to plot.
Okay.
So if you do this work again, you have no room to plot. Okay. All right. I don't want to print you another one. Okay. Go.
Look, does that look like your family? It's not been easy. Now, I will couch this and say that my kids have done pretty well. Their school was actually set up for online learning 10 years ago. They had a system in place in case of it. So they were prepared. They had this in case of a war outbreak or pandemic. They were already built for this with an online learning system. But there was actually a lot of vacillation right beforehand, like should the kids take home their Chromebooks, their laptops to do the work at home? We don't know. How many of you want your kids to take them home while we're under lockdown? And it was kind of like, yeah, you could if you want to. Thankfully we did, and because they're already set up with those machines. But so many schools don't have that. So they were ready. They were a little too eager, to be honest with you, our kids' school. They were like, oh yeah, we've been ready for this. So they were able to transition to online learning almost immediately. Even the nursery classes were able to do like dance and sing along and letters and numbers and learning about the weather and different colors and rainbows and things like that. So our little 3-year-old, she had class online. But for so many other kids, that's not the case. And for so many schools, they weren't set up and prepared for that. I know in Pennsylvania, that was the case where you had schools that were like, we don't know what we're doing. So those first few weeks, the kids didn't learn anything. It was like they were on vacation for 2 weeks. And then suddenly the schools were like, I guess we're not going back. We better put something in place. It was incredibly difficult for a lot of teachers who never taught that way before. Now suddenly they're having to change entire lesson plans built around Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams and putting lesson plans online. And look, I love teachers, but let's be honest, they're not always the most technologically advanced. I remember when I was in elementary school, because I would play video games, I was more advanced than my 3rd grade teacher. And they would ask me to set up the film strips and stuff. Like, Clayton, can you help with the film strips and projector? Because I don't know how this thing works. Bless them. But now you're asking them how to do large conference calls with students on Zoom calls? That's tough. I feel for them. Not to mention the fact that there's no internet for most people. I was struck by this. This is about internet for Americans. Roughly 20% of students don't have access for remote learning. Look at these states. These are the estimated percentages without reliable internet connections. If you're in black here, 25% or higher. I mean, look at West Virginia, down into Tennessee, or yeah, is that Tennessee? No, that's Kentucky. What is that? Sorry. No, yeah, that's Kentucky. Down into Alabama, Louisiana, Arizona. That's amazing. 20% of students nationwide don't have access to internet. 9.7 million kids that don't have internet access. 9.7 million kids. Some in Austin and Belleville, Illinois. Listen to this. I told my wife this morning. She's like, that's heartbreaking. They put Wi-Fi wired into buses into parking lots. So students could come and pull up in their parents' cars in their cars and surround these Wi-Fi buses and do their classes from their cars. What? I mean, thank God they had that Wi-Fi in a bus, but really? It's why I think we should have, we should be treating internet access, this day and age should be treated just like electricity and water and sewer. It should be, we should have like we had during World War II, right? We had rural electrification, where there was a big movement, obviously, to get electricity to most of those parts of the country that didn't have it. By the way, we're still not done with that. There's still parts that haven't finished this rural electrification program 50 years, 60 years later. I think we should do the same for internet. This is a utility, and it actually helps our country beat out other countries. Treating internet, like laying internet lines as a utility for our country is incredibly important. It helps us gain traction on China and other countries that are leading us in math and science. Why do people from other countries have to come here and become doctors? So we need them. So we should absolutely, I believe, have an internet electrification program in this country. That's my thought. If we can spend $900 billion a year on defense and wasting it on defense projects that we do not need, we can absolutely pay to get internet access to Americans all across this country. 9.7 million kids without it. What happens if this happens again? And our kids are already behind 50% on math, 70% on reading. Another school districts also had to prepare printed packets of homework and work for students without online access at all, which were handed out at food drive-through lines at the schools. So the schools would print out all these packets, you'd drive up and get your work, and then drive it home with no internet access. The other area is, kids cheating. This was another big concern in the data. It's like if the parents are busy doing work, they can't be watching every little thing that child is doing and actually learning. So are they cheating by doing something like this? Like, hey Siri, what's 4 plus 4?
4 plus 4 is 8.
Oh, 4 plus 4 is 8. Thanks, Siri. Appreciate that. Hey Siri, how do you say good morning in Portuguese?
In Brazilian Portuguese, good morning is bom dia.
Bom dia. Thank you, Siri. And how many kids have Alexas in their bedrooms, right? So it's hard to police that stuff. And so it's hard to know if kids are actually getting the answers themselves, they're working through these problems, or if they're cheating just by using Google or other things, and they're shortchanging themselves, having to problem solve by just using the internet. And guess what? The final part of this story, I just was stunned by this. Some students simply went missing altogether. They vanished from the system. Early in the shutdown, the Los Angeles School District estimated that on any given day in a week, 32% of high school students just didn't log in at all to learn for their remote classrooms. 32%. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be allowed to graduate. 32%. I know some school districts that just threw up their hands and said, we're done. We're just ending school early, a month early. What about you? I'd love to hear in the comments, what was your experience with virtual learning? Like I said, our kids, I was impressed by them. My son, before quarantine, did not know fractions at all, at all. He had to learn a whole new skill set in fractions from his teachers teaching him remotely. He ended up just having a fractions test earlier this week, and he got an 87% on the test. He didn't know them at all. And he learned fractions, passed a test, and got an 87%. That was amazing. So he did learn new skills. He's been reading like crazy, but PE is a little bit different, right? They're not going and playing with other kids. One thing that my wife said this morning, and I thought was really important to bring up about this remote learning, is that for some kids who feel challenged and left behind because they compare themselves to other kids. Very often kids are seeing that their friend or another kid in their class is so fast at math problems, finishes that word problem and gets done really quickly, while other kids are really left behind by it. and they feel scared because they're not keeping up with their friends. Remote learning in many ways removed that. And my son is not fast in math. He is not. But if he takes his time to work on it, he gets it done and he gets it done well. But he needs that time. So if now he's been able to spend a larger part of the day working through different things in math, he's like me, he was not a math guy. And so, he takes his time on that, and because of quarantine, because of lockdown, he's excelled in math, which I find interesting. So I know there are bright spots in this. I was struck early also by the data that suggested 1 in 4 parents would say they're absolutely done with school, they're all in on homeschooling. Actually, it was more than that. It was like 30% of parents said they're all in on homeschooling. Now, this was back in like March, April, early April, after just a few weeks. I'd really be curious what that number looks like now, because no way, no way am I homeschooling. Absolutely not. I value our teachers. I think they've done an amazing job with our kids, and there's just no way. There's no way. Especially when I have to look and see this,
Write out your data
like my
set
wife and
first.
daughter.
1, 3, 8,
Good.
7, 5.
Now, remember,
Okay.
Remember,
Okay,
you're gonna
okay,
have to
okay,
plot.
Okay.
so if you
Okay,
do
okay,
this
okay,
work
okay,
again,
okay.
you have no room to plot. Okay, all right, I don't want to print you another one.
She is her mother's daughter, feisty. But she, my little girl, Ava, she wouldn't be talking to her teacher that way, because her teacher is from New Jersey. So she's a Jersey girl, she's a Jersey girl. So she's not going to put up with that. So she's been mostly good. She really works on her homework and gets things done. But anytime you have that interaction with your parents, you'd be like, focus. Mommy, I got it. Stop, get off my back. I want to do my homework. I've got it. So I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on homeschooling right now. Do you plan to do it? Or are you excited to get these kids back to their proper place of learning so they can have that structured environment? I know where I come down on this. Let me know in the comments below.